or two of the issues related to the management of your wealth, your oil and gas specifically. And sometimes we tend to go over into the mining sector.
Kaieteur Radio, keeping you informed.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Burby's 99.5 FM. Kaieteur Radio.
Good night, everyone. My name is Kemol King, and you're listening to my show, Petroleum 101. Every Tuesday night, what I try to do when I bring you all on here to listen to me or watch me on Facebook is I try to educate you in a simple fashion about one or two of the issues related to the management of your wealth, your oil and gas specifically. And sometimes we tend to go over into the mining sector. Tonight, what I want to talk about is transparency as opposed to secrecy in the oil and gas sector. And tonight, to help me have that discussion is my colleague Mikaila Prince, who has also been writing some stories on oil and gas. To start off this discussion, what I want to note is that we have had a culture of secrecy pervade the management of Ghana's government for many, many years. And unfortunately, that culture has now taken over the management of our oil sector. One of the things that Kaieteur News and Kaieteur Radio we have tried to do as an anti-corruption watchdog is to advocate for more transparency in our oil and gas sector. We know that the oil and gas sector is probably the most lucrative sector in the world, with billions of US dollars moving through every single day. And with so much money passing through the sector, there is a great likelihood for corruption. And a lot of questionable decisions have been made by politicians, by our leaders, who are in government right now or in the last government. They've made many questionable decisions that many political commentators and industry experts have looked upon, and they've said, was this the best decision that they made? And Kaieteur News has found itself time and time again getting this piece of information and that piece of information that we did not know before, that was pertinent for the people to know. And it leads us to ask the question over and over again, why are our leaders not being forthright with us about the things that they're doing, with things that we're supposed to know? So there are some anti-corruption advocates who want to see Guyana's oil sector managed well. We have organizations like the Global Witness and the NRGI, the Natural Resource Governance Institute, which they have always staunchly advocated for transparency. So tonight, what we're going to do, Mikaila and I, we're going to talk about some of the incidents that have plagued Guyana's oil sector from the management from 2015 to now, and how secrecy has hurt Guyana, and how things have been kept from the people. One of the things that I want to address first is the secrecy around the 2016 contract that has been granted to ExxonMobil. Now, this is the contract that governs the area called the Stabroek Block. And in the Stabroek Block, ExxonMobil has made 18 material discoveries since 2015. And we knew how excited everybody was when ExxonMobil made its first discovery in 2015. The first thing that people started to throw around was, oh wow, Dubai has oil. And if we have oil too, maybe we can get to a place where we look like them. Or Singapore or Saudi Arabia, because we know these are rich countries which struck oil, and they've used the wealth that they got from that sector to spring the society up. The issue that we have in Guyana is that we found that our oil contract has a series of provisions that are extremely oppressive. And one of the reasons that the contract is so oppressive is that our leaders at the time decided that they didn't want to bring this contract to Parliament and pull it apart with the opposition and talk about what was good and what was not. And the thing about this contract too is that it was kept for the public for more than a year after it was signed. And this was after a lot of public calls for it to be released. We also have the issue of the signing bonus, which came with the contract. And for me, I think this signing bonus, the hiding of the signing bonus, is even more egregious, because why would government officials get money, such a substantial amount, 18 million US dollars, and hide it from the public? What usually happens when a government receives money like that, what they're supposed to do is to put it into the consolidated fund. What the government did not do was put it into the consolidated fund. They put it into a separate account. And when the officials were asked about it in public hearings, in public press conferences, they tried to maneuver their way out of the question. One of the questions that was asked to one of our officials is, did you know about the $20 million signing bonus? And the official responded, no, we did not receive a $20 million signing bonus. Later on, when the information came out, then the politician said, maybe if you had asked me a different question, you asked me, did we receive a $20 million signing bonus? And I answered correctly. Maybe if you asked me, did we receive an $18 million signing bonus, I would have said something else. What that politician is saying is that I answered the question honestly. But in the grand scheme of things, would you really say it was an honest answer, Mikaila?
No, it is not an honest answer at all.
So we've come to today where we have this history of secrecy with the management of the oil and gas sector, not just with the coalition government, but with the PPP government prior to 2015. They have been very secretive in their governance. And there are also questions, even now that the PPP government is in its August, September, October, November, their third month.
Just over 100 and something days.
There are questions about whether they are telling us everything. So one of the things that Mikaila has been covering is the issue of the crude marketing bids. Earlier this year, or was it last year, there was a press conference held by the Department of Energy, during which the media sought to get a series of details about who the government would choose to assist it in the marketing of its first million barrels of oil. And during that press conference, that very hasty press conference held by the Department of Energy, the media, I would say, had a very difficult time getting the details that it really wanted to hear. What the head of the Department of Energy, Dr. Mark Bino,
Would be former head now.
yeah. At the time, I was gonna say, he said that there are certain things that you do that you're not supposed to tell the public about immediately. He said there are certain things you do, and you tell them when you're doing it. There are certain things you announce that you're going to do, and then you do it. Or there are certain things that you do, and then you tell them after the fact. Obviously, there were many media operatives who disagreed with this and expected a little more transparency from the government in matters like these. After all, this is the issue of the sale of Guyana's most valuable asset. Fast forward to today, Mikaila Prince has been covering this issue about who is going to market and sell Guyana's crude. So Mikaila, why don't you give the public a little rundown of what has been happening at the NPTAB and the issue of secrecy.
Thank you, Kemol. I think I need to go back and just give some background into the whole crude marketing bid.
Sure.
The government had announced that they needed someone to sell our share of the crude, and they were inviting bids from commodity traders and oil companies from all across the globe. And we received 34 bids initially. And when I did my research in all of these companies, I found that at least 15 or 16 of them were linked to corrupt practices, and some of them were charged, and some of them are still pending, hearing some court cases. And the sheer audacity of these companies to come here and to try to secure this contract, even though in the request for proposal, that document that invited them to come here said that if you were caught in any sort of corruption, and it disqualifies you. But they still sent in their bids. And during the time, it was after the elections.
Yes.
And the government at the time, the former APNU AFC, did not have the authority to go ahead with this bid. Well, the contract of itself. And they still went ahead anyway, and they selected many of the companies that I had reported were tainted.
The shortlisted.
They shortlisted them, yeah.
Okay, could I cut you there? I want the public to get an understanding first of the kinds of scandals that these companies were involved in.
Okay.
So would you mind describing those scandals a bit? What were these companies involved in that you would say could have disqualified them from being considered to market Guyana's crude?
Okay, so public documents show, for example, that 3 of the world's largest commodity traders, Glencore, Mercuria, and Vital SA, they were caught in the operation, I forget the name of it.
Car wash?
The Operation Car Wash in Brazil,
Yes.
which found that these oil companies were bribing employees in Petrobras, which is the Brazilian state oil company. They were bribing them so that they can secure contracts. And it was a whole money laundering fiasco that blew up, causing even government officials to be convicted.
Yes.
So these are some of the companies, three, for example, that had submitted their applications to sell Guyana's share of the crude.
Okay.
What else? So when we realized that these companies had a very tainted background, we reached out to NPTAB, which is the body responsible for selecting the winning company, and we asked them, who are these people? Who are your evaluators? Who will be selecting the winning company? What are their qualifications?
Yes.
And at the time, the former chairman of the NPTAB, Mr. Mark Bender, he told us that I can't release the name of those people for confidentiality purposes and whatnot. And that was since June or July of this year. And we pressed and we pressed and we pressed, and we got nowhere with getting the identities of these evaluators.
Yes.
And when the PPP came into government, the vice president, Mr. Barjagdio, had give his assurances that
When
Kaieteur News asked him whether the government will be willing to release the names of those evaluators, and he said, yes, sure, we'll do that for you. And today, when I called the chairman of the tender board, NPTAB, and I asked him, when are we going to get these names? He told me that NPTAB will not be releasing the names. It will have to be the vice president, because he is the one that promised it. So we're caught in between a rock and a hard place. It's always going around trying to get transparency for something as important as the selling of Guyana's crude.
I want to ask you a question about that, but before I get to that, I want to remind the public that for the first sale of Guyana's crude, I'm pretty sure that the evaluators did not do their proper due diligence, or maybe they did their due diligence, and they decided that they didn't care anywhere. So the company that we first chose to market Guyana's crude is a company called Royal Dutch Shell. Shell is one of the super majors in the oil industry. And Shell has been implicated in a $1.3 billion bribery corruption scandal for its attempts to get its hands on a lucrative oil block in Nigeria. Now, in Nigeria, there is an oil block called OPL 245, Oil Prospecting License 245. And there's this man called Dan Etete. Dan Etete was the oil minister of Nigeria. And what Dan Etete did while he was in office was he created a company called Malibu Oil and Gas. And he awarded the block OPL 245 to Malibu Oil and Gas. He awarded a block to his own company. And then years later, there were so many things that happened in the years that followed. He was convicted as a money laundering, and he was under investigation by the Nigeria's Financial Crimes Commission. Shell, along with another company called Eni, these two companies together, I don't know how to put it, they were part of this elaborate scheme where they transferred $1.3 billion in all in order to get the rights to this block from Malibu. So there were a lot of negotiations happening between the government and Malibu and Shell and Eni. And of this $1.3 billion, the government only actually received about $200 million. The rest of the money, according to the Nigerian government in court documents that they're using to sue these companies, the money went toward Dan Etete, to a series of companies run by his affiliates, to pay kickbacks for officials and executives of Shell and or Eni or their affiliates, and to bribe officials in the Nigerian government. One of the things that I should note is that $411 million of the money went to a company, according to the court documents, called Rocky Top Resources. And two of the directors of that company were Dan Etete himself and his nephew Ken Etete, who has actually set up a company in Guyana called Century Tamara Energy Services. So I brought this story up just to say that this is one of the biggest corruption scandals in the world, possibly the biggest corruption scandal. And our government decided to hand the first deal to market Guyana's first set of oil to the public. So it really brings you to ask the question, what about due diligence? And that's why it was so important for Kaieteur News to get their hands on the evaluators. Could you tell us, Mikaila, a little about the role of an evaluator in this process and why we need to know who the identities of the persons are?
Okay. Well, the role of the evaluators would include, according to the request for proposals in the document of itself, is to do due diligence on this company, to do the background records, to know if this person is qualified enough, this oil company or commodity trader is qualified enough to sell Guyana's crude. And the importance, well, in order to do that, you have to have certain qualifications, because you wouldn't go to any doc, or you wouldn't go to anyone to treat you if you're sick. You go to a qualified doctor. So it's the same principle with the commodity trading of the oil. So when we have the people at the MPTAB, and if you are qualified enough, and if you get the training and the guidance, then you will be able to select a qualified and not so well a qualified applicant.
Okay.
And we don't know right now who those evaluators are.
Well, let me ask you first. Does Guyana have any qualified persons working in the public service or otherwise that can evaluate this, or have we had to hire people from overseas?
From the last couple of stories that we had done, it indicated that we had the people at MPTAP did not have the qualifications to select any winner.
So it's most likely, even if we haven't trained them yet, then we most likely had to hire someone from overseas.
Well, that's the other thing as well. We reached out to them and we asked, okay, so you have this very important bid. You don't have the qualifications. The people they don't have the skills.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to be reaching out to international agencies or other countries who can assist you with it? Mm-hmm. And they just refused to answer the questions.
Okay. So I want to add a little more to really bring it home about why it's so important for us to know the identities of the evaluators. The role of an evaluator, for me, it is so important in making a fair decision, because if an evaluator makes a decision to give the contract to the company involved in the world's biggest corruption scandal, then I want to know why that evaluator made that decision, don't you?
Yes.
And we have had issues here in the management of Guyana's oil and gas sector where the government has hired controversial specialists to make important decisions like these. So one example is with the hiring of this guy named Michael Warner for the drafting of Guyana's local content policy. The local content policy is a document that is supposed to guide the oil companies' commitments to hiring qualified Guyanese and using Guyanese services and supplies. So one of the first persons who was contracted to draft Guyana's local content policy was a very qualified local content expert and energy strategist named Anthony Paul. Anthony Paul is from Trinidad and Tobago. Mm-hmm. And Anthony Paul has worked with several governments
across the globe.
And he is well respected. He has produced or contributed to local content policies that have been highly successful. And so when he came here, he worked on multiple local content policy drafts after he consulted with the relevant stakeholders, of course. But after a point, the government decided, I suppose they decided they didn't want to utilize his services anymore for the drafting of this policy. They wanted to hire someone else. So they hired this consultant called Dr. Michael Warner. The problem with Dr. Michael Warner is that he was hired by ExxonMobil to work on its Center for Local Business Development. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the problem there. You're hiring a man to draft a document that will regulate the operations of ExxonMobil, but this man had ExxonMobil as a client. This man was paid by ExxonMobil. He benefited from ExxonMobil. So do you expect that a person who has benefited from ExxonMobil would be free of the desire to draft this policy in such a way that benefits ExxonMobil? Do you think that there is no conflict of interest there? What do you say, Mikaila?
There's definitely a conflict of interest there. You're paying me, but the government has also hired me to do something for them. So obviously, if I'm getting money from one source, then I'm going to be loyal to this source. So I will do my best to I will give my all to this one person.
And we've had that happen even before with the hiring of the company that is supposed to revise Guyana's decades-old petroleum laws. So Guyana's petroleum laws have been around since the 1980s. And the Granger government hired a law firm that we later found out has worked for ExxonMobil. So the question comes up again, why are you hiring a company that has worked for ExxonMobil? Don't you think that this company is going to make decisions in the drafting of Guyana's laws, and not just the petroleum laws they were responsible for, not just the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act? This company had the responsibility of looking at the entirety of Guyana's petroleum legislatory framework and the entire regulatory framework, and giving the government advice on what it thinks would be best. Why do you think that a company that was hired by ExxonMobil would not make decisions in the interest of the company that paid it, as opposed to the government that's hiring it now? The conflict, there are so many conflicts, and I can go through examples over and over and over again that have occurred in the past few years. So this is why it's so important for the public to know who the evaluators are. What if they hired someone who has worked for ExxonMobil? What if they hired an official who's linked to somebody who collected a bribe in some scandal in Nigeria or in America? These are things that we need to know. And Kaieteur News is big on due diligence. If the government is not big on due diligence, then we have to be the watchdogs. And so this is an issue that Kaieteur News is going to continue to follow. Mikaila is going to continue to work towards getting the information about the evaluators. And the Vice President has given his commitment that the government will release the identities of the evaluators. But the government has not pulled through on that promise yet. So that brings us to the end of Petroleum 101 on this Tuesday night. I want to thank you all for listening or watching on the Facebook Live. I am receiving your texts. I am seeing your comments on the Facebook Live. And I am very grateful for the insight that you're giving to Kaieteur News. So I'm going to bid you adieu, and I'm going to beg you, please join me again next week, next Tuesday, and hopefully Mikaila will join me again.
Sure. I'd love to.
So you've been watching or listening to Petroleum 101. I am Kemol King.
And I'm Mikaila Prince.
Good night.